What's up, guys? With Evil Dead Rise upon us pretty soon, I want to get the last two Evil Dead reviews out of the way. I've done the original and I've done the remake. Detailed reviews on both those, so I'm not going to redo those, but I'm definitely going to do Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness. So let's get started with Evil Dead 2 Groovy, baby. Evil Dead 2 stars Bruce Campbell, Sarah Berry, Dan Hicks, Ted Raimi, and is directed by Sam Raimi. What's up, guys? Exciting day. Gonna be reviewing Evil Dead 2. This is probably one of the most beloved films in all of horror, at least over the last, I don't know, 40 years, something like that. Came out in 1987. And I'll say this going into this review, and really, I guess, all the Evil Dead movies, casual Evil Dead fan. I'm not like I don't have just, I guess it's just not like Halloween is to me, okay? I don't have like Evil Dead all over the place, but I definitely have my Ash Funko Pop. I think Ash is one of the coolest freaking characters in horror, for sure. I think part of the reason why maybe I didn't grasp onto Evil Dead is because I didn't watch the movies when they came out back in '87. And we'll go into why, why maybe I didn't watch the movie, because it wasn't highly advertised, I think, at the time. It was an unrated movie. I don't think this movie has a rating. I don't think it's rated R. But also, I mean, if you look at the Evil Dead movies as a whole, there's really no continuity with a lot of them, okay? And I will say Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness are back-to-back, so those two go together. But even Evil Dead 1 to Evil Dead 2 is kind of a head scratcher, and we'll get into all that. We'll get into the backstory. We'll get into a lot in this review. All right, I definitely want to give it its due. And also, big shout out to Matt Casey, who way back, I think maybe a year or a couple years ago, he wanted me to review this whole franchise, and I did the remake and I did the original. Okay, so Matt, this one's for you, buddy. Okay, and I'm definitely going to do Army of Darkness too. First off, let's give you a quick plot synopsis. This is a strange one to give a plot synopsis for, okay? And I guess we can kind of go into the backstory with Evil Dead 1, all right? Because basically, this is Ash, he goes to this cabin with his girlfriend Linda, and I mean almost immediately he has to chop Linda's head off. Okay, like almost immediately. Like, don't get up, don't go get a snack. Be right there parked on the couch, because within 5 minutes, Linda's head gets cut clean off, okay? Probably a little longer, but yeah, it's really quick. And so, we really jump right into the action. And really, I think the first little portion of this movie is kind of a mini movie. And really, if you do your research, you'll find out that they gave you like a brief, quick synopsis of everything that happened in the first movie without actually using the same characters. So that's why it gets so freaking confusing. And this is stuff that you wouldn't know unless you studied the backstory of this movie. There is this archaeologist from, I think, a couple of decades before. There's this family that owned the cabin. Ash and Linda, they're going to the cabin. Ash doesn't own that cabin, all right? They're just kind of using it for the night, sneaking in. It's like an abandoned cabin. Sure enough, the family, the daughter of the archaeologist, shows up later in the movie, pretty much after all the Linda shenanigans. And by the time she shows up, and her crew with Bobby Joe, who are the kind of the hillbilly couple, Bobby Joe and Jake, and her boyfriend, they all show up, and Ash is already in full, deadite insanity. And for the rest of the movie, it's pretty much like the first movie, but it's a lot more zany. There's a heavy dose of horror comedy thrown in. You can definitely tell that Sam Raimi has come into his own as an amazing director, not to take anything away from the work that he and the crew did in the first movie, but you can tell he upped his skills in a big way by the time he got to Evil Dead 2. Now, let's talk about the first movie real quick. The reason that they couldn't use any of the first movie, because this is technically Evil Dead 2, was because they didn't have the rights. The first movie was filmed in 1980, didn't even come out until 83 in the States, 82 overseas. That movie wasn't the big hit that we know of it today. Stephen King had a heavy hand in getting that movie the fanfare that eventually came. And then, meanwhile, Sam Raimi, originally, he didn't want to just depend on horror, which he doesn't do today. I mean, yeah, of course he loves horror. He's done quite a few horror movies. But back then, you know, he and Bruce Campbell, they wanted to try different genres, and they did this movie called Crime Wave, like right after that, bombed, I mean, royally. So they were kind of like, oh shit, what do we do now? We could do a sequel to Evil Dead because Stephen King kind of made that movie popular, but it took years. So then Stephen King had this meeting with Dino De Laurentiis and basically convinced him to greenlight Evil Dead 2. You know, gave them a great budget and everything, and they already were in profit by the time they started shooting because they received so much money to make the movie. But the problem being, once they made the movie, still, I think at that time, Evil Dead in the States wasn't as big as it was overseas. Obviously, there was some confusion because this doesn't feel like a sequel to the first Evil Dead. But also, this didn't feel like really any other horror movies at the time. If you remember back in 1987, you had, you know, your big three, Michael, Freddy, and Jason. Those were, you know, kind of the big guns that were ruling the box office and horror at the time. It was mostly slashers. So Evil Dead kind of came out of left field, Evil Dead 2. This movie is like sensory overload. So much so, and you can kind of compare it to the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre with just how zany, how crazy it is, that they didn't want to give it an R rating. You know, they wanted to give it an NC-17. Or actually, I don't think NC-17 existed at the time. So I'll have to do my research on this, but I don't know if they gave it an X or just maybe made it unrated. But I know that Dino De Laurentiis actually created like this Rosebud, this like fake production company, just so they could actually give the movie like a no rating. Now, I don't think it's any accident that Evil Dead 2 ended up being, you know, so heavily a horror comedy. The co-writer on this, Scott Spiegel, he had this short called Attack of the Helping Hand, which it looked like an attack on a housewife, and I think it looked like a hamburger helper hand or something like that. And it's just a little short, but you'll see a lot of similarities to that little short and the whole Ash fighting with his hand section in the movie, all the way down to his own hand flipping him in the bird. But, you know, I think luckily Dino De Laurentiis didn't, you know, micromanage them, and he pretty much just let them make the movie that they wanted to make, because this movie is so crazy that I think a bigger studio would have pumped the brakes on them and said, no, we probably don't want to do that. And keep in mind, guys, this wasn't the first horror comedy, but horror comedies weren't a safe bet back then like they probably are today. Most horror movies were pretty serious back then. Fun, but more serious. Now, you could say that Friday the 13th Part 6 is definitely steeped in horror comedy, and that came out a year before. But again, still, it wasn't so prevalent like it is now. So I think Friday Part 6 and Evil Dead 2 kind of created this whole new subgenre of horror. Now, you could say maybe the B-level type, like trauma type stuff, it was a safer bet to have comedy in there, but you know, the A-list type stuff, not so much. Now, there's a reason why Bruce Campbell is such a horror icon. Yes, Ash is the main character in the first movie, but this ain't the same Ash. Ash was more of, I guess, on the receiving end of things in the first movie, more reactionary. Whereas in this movie, this is a character that takes hold and just really kicks ass. Yes, he's reactionary to a lot of the shit that's going on, but the work that Bruce Campbell put into this character, the physical comedy, it looks exhausting. I would even wager that maybe Jim Carrey got a little bit of influence from some of the stuff that Bruce Campbell was doing in this movie. I don't know that for sure, but damn, is it uncanny. I don't think you see as many one-liners, although of course you get the iconic groovy in here. There might be one or two others, but for the most part, it's just more physical comedy on Bruce Campbell's part. And I mean that as a pro in the biggest way.
Swallow this.
Even though Bruce Campbell is so damn amazing in Evil Dead 2, he is heavily propped up by Sam Raimi's genius direction. And I haven't really watched Evil Dead 2 in quite a while. And I will admit, like the last few times I watched it, like I did a commentary on it. And when you're doing a commentary, you got to like talk through the whole thing. Which, by the way, that commentary, it's got way too many views. I don't understand that. YouTube is very weird sometimes. The last time I literally sat down, didn't do anything, just focused on the movie, I can't remember. It's been so long. So this time I watched the movie, God, it's really well-paced, well-structured movie, and there's not a dull moment. You know, like I was talking about earlier with Sam Raimi's direction and how he was able to really up his game in this movie and get even more creative. Yeah, the first movie, I think the big, I guess, trick in his directing tool belt was the fast zoom in, you know, the what I would call like the deadite camera. Yeah, that's definitely here, but so many more little flavors are just thrown in throughout the movie. You know, you have like this moment where the other characters, they come into the movie like after the first quarter of the movie, and all the crazy shit's going on, and there's a scene in there where all the characters, they're just reacting like in 2-second increments, you know, and they're looking like up and then down and then left and then right, and it could be two characters, two subjects in the frame, and they're just following the camera. And they're just obviously taking direction from Sam Raimi, and he's telling them, hey, I need you to look here, 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 and here. This shot is all about timing. This is a director that is, you know, has his hands fully in every single scene throughout the movie. And when I'm watching this, I'm just amazed, you know, just I guess from a directing standpoint, because it's a lesson. Like, you can tell some movies, the camera is just parked and, you know, maybe they're prepared and the scene's set out, but everything just kind of happens in front of the camera, and they might have a few, you know, coverage shots here and there, but nothing to this level. This is a directing auteur. There's a reason why I guess Sam Raimi is one of the big boys in the directing game, because of the work that he did in this movie, in Evil Dead 2. This is a little low-budget horror movie, but I would dare say that this is some of the most challenging, professional, and experienced directing I've ever seen. I would even say that this is one of those movies, I guess you could say the comedy portion of this movie, where the direction, the camera work, gets just as many laughs, if not more laughs, than the actual actors in the movie. Most comedies, all the actors do the heavy lifting. You know, they sell the jokes, the punchlines delivered, but no. This is like an ensemble type thing where every single facet of the movie is involved in getting you to laugh or getting you to be scared. Just next level. I can see how directors like Edgar Wright could be influenced by Evil Dead 2. And I would even say Evil Dead 2 has probably influenced so many big directors working today, you know, like Peter Jackson. And I could probably name off quite a few more, especially younger directors working today. But it's just inspiring. I think that's the big thing about Evil Dead 2. That they shot this movie on a pretty low budget, and, you know, just having a hard-working team, having a vision, and just being, you know, creative. At the end of the day, that's what this is about, is just being creative. What can we do? We have a simple story. How can we make it unique and, I guess, kind of unlike anything else out there? Because there's nothing like Evil Dead 2 back in the 80s, and hell, there's not much like it today. Now let's jump over to Henrietta in the cellar door section. Henrietta was the wife of, I guess, the Annie's father, the archaeologist. And she died, you know, because he had to kill her, and she was buried down in the cellar. And so, of course, she comes alive, and she is taunting them. And one of the things I love about the Deadites is how they can go back and forth between the original subject and the Deadite that has taken over. And there's a few moments like that in this movie. And there's some misdirection because there's one scene where Annie and her boyfriend are there.
Baby. Mother?
And Henrietta, she shifts over into Annie's mother, you know, the normal person.
Unlock these chains. Quickly.
And so the camera's focused on her, and then out of frame comes in Annie's boyfriend, who is now a Deadite.
That thing in the cellar is not my mother.
It's a jump scare that actually works, Because jump scares can work, especially when they're handled appropriately. And boy, are they handled amazingly in Evil Dead 2. This is a horror comedy that achieves success on both fronts. It's hilarious, but yet it's scary as hell in some scenes. Now, one of my favorite scenes of the movie is Bobby Joe and how, like Ash, he squeezes Henrietta's head and then the eyeball pops into Bobby Joe's mouth. And Bobby Joe ends up running out of the cabin, and then she's attacked by a tree. Now, if we remember in the first Evil Dead, of course, there's a tree attack. Much more controversial because of what happened in that movie. But in this one, I think it's just more fun. And the scene, it seems a bit more ambitious with what they're trying to pull off. You got the tree limbs actually going into Bobby Joe's face. It's some really gnarly stuff. And it's a great example of how it's scary, but it's also kind of hilarious. Oh, and by the way, I forgot to mention this. Greg Nicotero worked on the practical effects in this movie. There is a behind the scenes clip where he is putting together Henrietta, and if you look in the background, you'll see the bust of Jesse from Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, and I just love that. So awesome. Now, last thing I want to talk about with Evil Dead, of course, is the groovy scene and how Ash, he's had enough. Him and Annie, they are taking on Henrietta once and for all. And this is where Ash becomes a complete badass. You know, earlier in the movie, there's a hilarious scene where he's using his own hand to inch forward to try to grab the cleaver, and he ends up cutting his own hand off. So in this scene, a one-handed Ash, he installs the chainsaw, and he becomes a complete badass. I always love these particular scenes in Sam Raimi movies where it's kind of just a step-by-step type, how do we get from A to Z? And so let's just film step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, all the way until the goal is achieved. It's silly and it's kind of funny. Guys, in the end, and I'm so glad I gave this movie another fresh watch. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I think Evil Dead 2, I've always stated that Evil Dead 1 is my favorite. I think Evil Dead 2 is better than Evil Dead 1. This is a perfect horror movie in every sense, and the direction is flawless. I think it's one of the most important horror films ever made, and I gotta give Evil Dead 2 a unicorn. I can't believe I'm doing that. I would have never guessed that, but I'm giving Evil Dead 2 a unicorn. So, wow. So anyway, guys, let me know your favorite part of Evil Dead 2 down in the comments. Looking forward to hearing them. Also, be sure to come over to Killer Flicks, where we talk horror all day and every day. On Fridays, we do Free Fall Fridays. Follow me at Drumdums on my socials. Support me on Patreon. Buy me a coffee. And guys, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day. And Drumdum out.